Always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for coming on, and thank you for bringing your cat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you have a new segment on the Jim Webb podcast that you've invented without realizing it.
Oh boy, what's that?
The new segment should come at the either the beginning or the end of your podcast, and it should be called "Whose Head is in the Box This Week."
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, that was a good movie. Really.
Well, I never cared for Gwyneth Paltrow at all. I think
Yeah.
she's a disaster and completely unimpressive. So I was happy to see her head in the box. But there, I think we could do a "Whose Head is in the Box" every week because there's always somebody who is really screwed up badly.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Donald Trump's head was definitely in the box, but I'm not sure. He may have to be retired to a box permanently after this, and then we'll have to open a new box for future people.
Yeah. You're not wrong there. But then again, I'm not entirely shocked. I mean, that he hid and fled. I mean, it seems kind of a unique parallel to his Vietnam experience. So I'm not really totally shocked by that. But
Unfortunately, there are times when you just have to go ahead and expose yourself to fire if you're going to
yeah,
be a leader, right?
100%.
And that's something that we talk a lot about, but I can tell you from personal experience, haven't seen very many senior people.
It's coming out now that, and the bigger picture here, it's coming out now that behind the intelligence tip off of the threat on Trump's life. And there's a couple different threads on here which really kind of pique my interest and bother me. One is the fact that we're still listening to these guys after they got us into this mess. And you can go no further than a guy like Joe Kent really see how that sausage was made on the inside and how destructive it is. And then the other part of it is, the timing of this, right? Like it happens on July 8th, and then all of a sudden we kick off that bombing campaign again on July 8th into the 9th. And I was trying to process all of this, and I couldn't help but think back to how George Bush was played during lead up to Iraq. We're saying like, oh, there's a threat on your dad. And it seemed to be kind of a rumor at the time, but when you start seeing these little data points, it looks like a trend um, being pushed out by foreign intelligence.
Well, listen, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. First of all, to whom did the president decide to listen?
Mhm.
If the CIA essentially dismissed that as not credible, and he turns around and takes it seriously because it comes from the Mossad, what's running everything in the United States right now, particularly in the war.
Mhm.
I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a very bad thing. It sounds to me as though the Israelis don't just have his ear; they have his complete confidence, and he's going to listen to them, and they're the people with the final word. Very disturbing.
No, I'm right there with you. And my big concern about this is at what point do enough people inside, this gets into leadership too. At what point do enough people on the inside say, hey, this is enough. We got to stop doing this and start listening to our own people and looking after our own interests. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing a whole lot of traction. Is there any data point which you're picking up on that we might be moving in the right direction?
I think this is a done deal.
Mhm.
The Israelis are in charge. Uh, Donald Trump, for whatever reasons, and I don't know what they all are. I've always said I think he's under some kind of duress,
Hmm.
is going to follow what they say, and the people around him are going to reinforce that. It's in their interest to do so to keep this war going. So I think we're along for the ride until the ride ends, and this ride will end. But I don't think it's going to end as people think. There are two schools of thought. One is that, well, this is just going to end and we're going to quietly pack up our things and steal away into the night.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be disappointed by that because you and I both know that inside the United States, the vast majority of Americans could care less about this. They're much more focused on other fundamentally far more important things.
Mhm.
Secondly, we're wasting our time because we can't magically turn this thing around at this stage. So why reinforce failure? And then finally, the rest of the world would be grateful for its end for reasons that have to do with the economy.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's going to happen. So then, what are you left with? And I'm afraid we're going to wake up to something that we saw earlier, where the Israelis begin to attack again, and then, well, I guess we have to go support and help them, and we'll do it.
Yeah.
That'll be the excuse for us to reengage.
Which is going to be a pretty dark day if that happens. It's and part of me is like legitimately curious about how we could even sustain that effort. One of the big things that came out, I'm just going to pivot right to this, is this equality of life on the Abraham Lincoln, and I've got a personal tie to it. My mom actually christened that ship when it in Norfolk way back in the day. She keeps tabs on it like you wouldn't believe. Probably as close to her son. I don't think she's sending anybody on that ship a polo shirt if they happen to wear a Hawaiian shirt on the air. But she keeps close tabs on it. And we've got reports that they are, there's multiple people being prevented from going overboard. They haven't had a port call in 200 days. What does this say about the status of our forces in terms of their warfighting capability?
Well, that's worth exploring, but let me just say something right off the bat at the outset. We are not involved in fighting the Imperial Japanese Navy.
Mhm.
We were not recently attacked, and as a result, had to put to sea with whatever we had.
Mhm.
On our way, went to Midway. In other words,
Yeah.
we're not scraping together everything that we need and making the best of a bad situation and hoping for a good outcome. And anybody who studied Midway, we should not have won.
Mhm.
And we can certainly attribute that to a lot of courage and on the part of the people that fought it. But on the other hand, you have to ask yourself how some of these decisions were made by the Japanese that resulted in such a disaster. I mean, this whole thing, a lot of I would say, a combination of luck and divine providence in it.
Mhm.
We're not in that, Jim.
Mhm.
The problem with this entire war. Everybody talks about, well, Iran, we've been at war with them for 47 years. Well, let's go back to the Iran-Iraq war. We helped set that up. We helped to equip and train and advise. And one of my fellow company commanders, when I was in a tank battalion at Fort Carson, left to go advise the Iraqis during the war. He was over there for years, and they were getting all sorts of information, intelligence, you name it, from us. The whole goal was, as openly stated, we have to destroy this regime. If we can't destroy it, we've got to bleed them out.
Yeah.
Because everybody was convinced they were like the Bolsheviks in 1918. If we don't destroy them, they'll overrun everything and on and on and on. And so, but if you're an Iranian and you lost between 500 and 700,000 or more casualties, so thousands of dead in a very tragic war, how does that go down with you? What's your view of us?
Yeah.
It's catastrophic. So for them, it's an existential fight, and they're not going to capitulate. They're not going to do anything we want them to do. And there's so much blood that has been spent. This is something else people don't understand.
Mhm.
When you fight each other and you kill each other in great numbers, the blood itself cries out for vengeance. I mean, that was, remember, Pearl Harbor.
Mhm.
You never heard that in Europe with the Germans because they hadn't attacked us.
Mhm.
And FDR and subsequently Eisenhower, when he was the Supreme Court, was always angry because he said, none of these people really want to kill Germans. Well, it was a different war from the one that we were fighting in the Pacific.
Mhm.
The Pacific was a war of ruthless extermination waged by both sides against each other. Now, what does it mean about our military readiness? First of all, it is incomprehensible to me that any admiral in command out there, let alone the chief of naval operations, or this man Cooper, would not have said, Mr. President, I need to fly to Washington long before this and said, we cannot maintain this posture.
Right.
We have to back down. We have to back off. We have to change our approach. We just can't maintain the forces. Remember, a lot of people don't understand that almost all the ports in the area are closed to us.
Mhm.
Nobody wants us. That's how popular we are for waging this war. And nobody did that. I mean, even at the worst, at the height of the Napoleonic Wars, you had a mutant navy in the fleet because of the mistreatment. And people like Nelson and others stopped everything. And they talked to all of the sailors and they said, yes, we've got to change this. We've got to improve life.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not saying that it was a paradise to be in the Royal Navy after that, but life improved a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And my point is that we pushed this too far and we've got too many automatons who are anxious to be heroes and succeed in retirement with millions of dollars coming to them, not just to get another star. We all know that every general and admiral, what's he want for Christmas? He wants another star. It's more than that. And nobody stood up. And then, of course, you ask about who's the Secretary of the Navy? And, of course, we don't have one, but we've got this man, Hung Cao, and I think he's probably a decent person. But has he gone to the president and said, this is outrageous? He can certainly speak from experience, I would hope.
Mhm.
So the whole system is broken. It all seems rotten to me somehow. It's corrupted. And I'm getting a lot of information from people over there and in the Navy that the view of Cooper is about as bad as you're ever going to hear from anybody anywhere.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. I mean, you're always going to have people complain about who's ever in charge.
Mhm.
Everybody accepts that. But when this kind of thing starts, you've got a serious problem. And I think we have a very serious problem now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. This is the second carrier where you've had these kinds of incidents on it. If you remember back to the Ford, where they kept that ship at sea way past its deployment deadline or the end of its deployment. It went from the Med back over to Venezuela, then back to the Med around Iran, and then back. And now you've got I believe that the numbers here on the Lincoln, where it's been at sea continuously for 250 days plus, and every day it goes on. And Matt Bracken put out something that really contextualizes it. I haven't spent that much time at sea. I did spend a couple weeks at a time on an amphibious assault ship, and can say that some of the claustrophobia that he outlines in there and how the food starts to get worse and worse while you're out there. Really, it's not a whole lot of fun. And as a Marine, I had a lot more flexibility. I didn't have to share a rack with anybody. We weren't hot racking, which is what the Navy does. There's no, we were just there for the ride, basically. And had some freedom to move around. So you get a little bit of, mental space. But it's, I look at this as a complete failure of leadership in terms of what they're doing to their people. And unfortunately, the only way you really see this on the back end is in retention rates. But you were quoted quite extensively in an excellent piece by Kelly Vlahos in the American Conservative, talking about how the service academies aren't putting out quality leaders anymore, people who speak truth to power and should go the way of the woolly mammoth. I love that quote at the end. It was fantastic. But also the war colleges. Could you extrapolate a little bit on where you view the officer corps right now in the U.S. military?
Years ago, when I was a cadet and I was getting ready to graduate, I was talking to one of my classmates who became a one-star. His name was, and we were talking about the changes that were planned in anticipation of the arrival of women, because there were no women while we were there. And we had already seen many of the changes as undesirable because they were accommodations. Because you could not expect women to do the same things as men. You couldn't expect them to live like men. You couldn't expect them to behave like men. And well, that's all understandable. But the problem was that they had forced this integration, which meant that they were now within the organization. And, that meant that suddenly the standards for all the men changed. And one of the things he said to me was, you have to ask at some point while you are a cadet, just how badly you want to graduate from this damn place, because of all the crap that is thrown at you and how miserable the institution deliberately makes your life. I think that used to be the case at the Naval Academy. So I think he had a similar thing. And he said, you're forced into this gut-wrenching question. Why don't I just leave this? This is crazy. This is insane. I don't want to put up with this anymore. That's gone. You're not forced into that. I read about a Naval Academy graduate who came back in the 80s to a reunion, and he had been a resident of the Hanoi Hilton. And then later on, they promoted him towards the end to Rear Admiral, and he retired. And he came to this reunion, and they hadn't seen him, for a long time, his classmates. And they said, "Oh, you're going to love this. Things have really changed. You remember all that nonsense we went through when we were plebes and all this? All that's changed. Everything's cool now." And he looked around. And he said, "Well, that's interesting, because I was going to tell anybody that cared to listen that it was my plebe year at the Naval Academy that gave me what I needed to be in Hanoi." In other words, the question is, when you go to the military side, what are you doing to put iron into the souls of these young men? And I said, well, it's already there. When I went back to teach at West Point, they lectured us and said, well, all these young men and women are qualified to graduate today. They just arrived. They are the smartest, the best. They're much better than any of you were when you came, and on and on and on. They all deserve to graduate. So it's your job to make them successful. What planet is this man on? He's a 3-star general telling me this crap. His name was Palmer. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, then listen, why are we here?
Yeah.
Let's just pack it up. Let's change the name. University. Army University. And we can dump everything. We don't need anything anymore. You certainly don't need us because we're professional soldiers. We're trying to teach various subjects, but we're professional soldiers. Well, I think the mission comes first. I think people run it a close second, but the mission comes first. The question is, as you point out, is this mission going to produce what we want? Does it make sense? There are two problems that we haven't really come to terms with. Number one is that we have not had a force built for what I would call to fight a long war
Mhm.
with the supporting mountains of ammunition and steel and ships and so forth since 1991. I think after 1991, we decided we weren't going to need that, that whatever we did would probably be of short duration.
Mhm.
And then we systematically picked weak states without substantial air defense, missile power, navies, and so forth. And we were, in a relatively short period of time, able to subdue them. Now,
Mm.
I would argue most of those operations of pol- political reasons, not because we were not postured to defeat the enemies we met. We are now engaged in a war with an enemy that is not weak.
Right.
That's the first thing. So we're a short duration force structure designed for a short duration war. Bad match. Secondly, a lot of people miss something that should have been identified in Ukraine, and that is that today warfare is increasingly more like what we saw in 1916.
Mm.
It is what, in terms of what we saw in, say, 1942 or 43.
Mhm.
You can have a glint in your eye, and you need that glint.
Mhm.
I agree 100%, but the glint's not going to get you very far on the battlefield.
Mhm.
You can be the best at whatever you do, and what we've seen in Ukraine is top attack from above, whether it comes in the form of unmanned systems, precision guided missiles, precision anything,
Mhm.
because there's an inexhaustible quantity of it. We've seen the mass production of all these ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, everything in Russia. And this has annihilated more than 1.5 to 1.8 million Ukrainian soldiers. And now we look at Russia, and people are saying, well, why aren't the Russians moving faster? Well, part of the reason is they can't.
Mhm.
Now, on the front lines, they basically found ways to survive against this multitude of unmanned systems. They're doing pretty well. But what used to take 2 or 3 days takes 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Because if you're not deliberate, if you're not methodical, if you don't have air and missile defense in place, if you don't have the equivalent of high-tech sense of counter battery capability,
Mhm.
if you're not organized for electronic warfare, all of these things together, you're not going to get very far. That's very complex. It takes time. The Russians have gotten very good at it, and they're moving, but they're not moving 50 miles in a day. They're moving maybe 2 miles in a day, sometimes a little more. And you can't go through open spaces because you don't have sufficient overhead protection. So you're trying to avoid being caught in the open. This is the
Yeah.
sort of thing that happened to the German army at the end of the Second World War in the fall of 1944 and in the summer of 44. If they moved during the day and they were in the open, we struck them from the air. So they moved at night and they moved through these forested areas. And they still put up a horrendous fight, caused terrible casualties amongst us. But my point is, this is a different environment.
Right.
And now what we're seeing is this high-tech version of it with space-based surveillance, and you just don't bull your way through. I mean, I heard that the president said, why don't we have somebody with the guts to just drive that ship right into the Gulf, right through the... Well, he doesn't understand what he's dealing with.
Yeah.
That doesn't take guts, that takes stupidity. And I wouldn't ask anyone in the United States Navy to drive a capital ship through this because they'd be easily identified, neutralized, or sunken. And I keep trying to tell people, well, they'll sink us. I said, not necessarily.
It's really hard to
What
think.
you want to do is you want to neutralize the ship. You want to leave them dead in the water. Well, why would you do that? Because more people will come to rescue them.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a catastrophe on your hands. So you don't want to sink a carrier. You want to disable it. You want to leave it vulnerable out there. You want it dead in the water so that you can do more damage to it and everybody else that shows up.
Mhm.
Again, we are closer to the World War I scenario than we are to the World War II scenario. We don't have an easy answer.
Mm.
I'm sure at some point, even General Kane, who should have been the first to stand up, he should have understood this, but
Yep.
I don't know that he did. But people in the Air Force do understand with greater clarity than most what I'm talking about because they're very sensitive to the space-based systems, terrestrial systems, ISR. They're
Mhm.
linked to all the munitions and the strike systems and weapons. The Navy is too. They would have stood up and said, what we've seen thus far from the Iranians indicates that we're not really positioned to be successful here.